Hey folks, we're going to be discussing mammalian evolution today. This is Geology 3104C at the University of South Florida. Sarah Sheffield speaking. So we talked a little bit about diapsid evolution, and now we're going to be moving into synapsids, which includes the mammals, the group that, of course, you and I belong to. So we'll talk more about this cartoon here in a second, but hopefully you'll find that funny. All right, so to recap, amniotes. Things that are birthed from amniotic eggs with the amniotic fluid, yolk. Mammals have secondarily lost that hard shell, like the chicken egg, for example, though we do have the genes for it. They are inactive. Amniotes are broken into two major groups that we see today, the synapsids and the diapsids. Di meaning two, have two extra fenestra, openings in the skull. Synapsids, SY meaning one, have one extra. All right. The plesiomorphic condition, meaning the ancient condition, is zero holes, otherwise known as anapsid. We thought for a long time, as we said last class, that turtles were anapsids, but it turns out that their condition is a secondarily derived diapsid, so they've lost those holes again. All right, so synapsids are the only mammals, are the only remaining synapsids left. In the Permian, there were a lot of things called mammal-like reptiles, though really they were closer to reptile-like mammals, but everybody calls them mammal-like reptiles. So we've talked a little bit about Lystrosaurus. It's a really famous index fossil for looking at plate tectonic movement. It was one of the earliest pieces of evidence for it. And there's also Dimetrodon. A lot of folks confuse Dimetrodon with a dinosaur. It's actually much more closely related to you or me than a dinosaur. It is a synapsid. Here's our synapsid tree. We see synapsids show up before the Permo-Triassic extinction, which is this first red line here. And most everything makes it across, though, of course, we do suffer losses. We have our mammal-like reptiles. These completely disappear in the Mesozoic. And we see an expansive radiation of mammals in the Mesozoic. However, we'll see some trends here to show that the much larger radiation of mammals takes place after the KPG boundary. And there's good reasons to explain why. And I'm going to go through this tree really quickly here, but we see that the metatherians, and the marsupials, are over here. We have our monotremes, the egg-laying mammals, over here. And then we have our eutherians, which are going to be the group that includes you and me, and most of the mammals that we're familiar with, the primates, the deer, rodents, are over here, and other things. So Mesozoic synapsids, alive during the time of the non-avian dinosaurs, were mostly small and nocturnal. A lot of reasons that would be is because of the major predators at the time, the dinosaurs and the crocodiliforms. So there were a lot of large apex predators out, so most mammals were actually small, nocturnal. Here's an adorable example of a small nocturnal animal alive today. This is the long-eared jerboa. Has the longest ears to body mass ratio of any animal. Fun fact for the day. Adorable. So early mammals, they pretty much succeeded by hiding during the day. That was their claim to fame. All right, and this ended up working out really well for them because organisms that were small and were able to live underground were those that were more successful during the KPG extinction, right? With the asteroid impact and things like that. Living underground was a pretty darn good situation as long as you weren't living too close to that asteroid impact in the first place. So this is going to be called the Nocturnal Bottleneck Hypothesis, meaning that most everything that made it out were nocturnal. So requirements for this kind of lifestyle are going to pretty much be small, stay out of the way, stay warm, so high metabolic rate and fur, insectivory, eating insects. This is going to give us occluding teeth, meaning your teeth touch. If you will, please put your teeth together. You have occluding teeth. Sensing. So acute dim light vision in early mammals would have been common. Color vision doesn't really show up at this point. It'll show up a little bit later. And then highly developed sense of hearing, smell, and touch. We'll come back to the hearing, which means that large brains are going to start to be selected for, essentially selecting for senses processing. All right, so what's a mammal? how do we define a mammal? What are its synapomorphies? Fur or hair, producing milk to feed young. Young are birthed in different ways in mammals. So there are those that are those that are born by eggs, ovipary, and most mammals are viviparous, meaning live birth. And marsupials, the metatherians, we have the young are born early and then developed in the pouch, like a kangaroo. And then we have the placental mammals, like you and me. The young develop in the womb attached to a placenta and then are born. There's another couple things. The definitive mammalian middle ear. So this is where our ear is developed from our jaw joint. And then there's a couple different types of teeth. We're looking at heterodont teeth, meaning different types of teeth. Diphyodont teeth, meaning they're replaced once, typically. And occluding teeth, they fit together well. So teeth that are different types of teeth that get replaced once and fit together well. Those are the teeth, those are the synapomorphies of mammals. Okay, so we learned a little bit about this while reading Your Inner Fish. All right, we learned essentially how our ears get formed, and they form from the back parts of our jaw in embryo. So early synapsids and all diapsids have several bones that make up the lower jaw. Okay, so the jaw joins between the articular bone and the quadrate bone. These two bones right here, articular and quadrate. Ear is pretty simple. All right, there's just the stapes bone. Mammals have 3. All right, early synapsids and diapsids just have the stapes bone. What we see through mammalian evolution is we actually see the lower jaw bones changing. And what happens in mammals is that we actually lose that articular and quadrate bone that were here, and they actually move up to form the malleus and the incus bones. We can actually trace that through embryonic development. So this is one of the major transitions that we find, and we do have fossils that show this jaw to ear transition of mammalian development, which is really cool. A lot of those fossils are going to be found in places that show that age of transition into the Paleozoic to Mesozoic, and then, throughout the Mesozoic, like the Karoo Basin in South Africa, I believe, has some really great reptilian to mammal transitions. So the DMME, right, is extremely sensitive, in particular good at hearing high frequency noises compared to other vertebrates. This is how early mammals would have gotten that acute sense of hearing. So there should be a lot more stress on the jaws during the DMME transition, meaning that our ears would not be as good as they are, and they would cause a lot of issues. However, our ear bones have been miniaturized through time, right? So it's gone under some heterochromic development, and they've been miniaturized, and that really relieves some of that jaw stress. And how that's going to happen is the ear ossicles are going to be growing with negative allometry. If you remember that from our morphometrics lecture, negative allometry means it's growing less quickly than other parts of the body. Okay, so negative allometry, so it's growing a little bit smaller. So here we have that growth happening here. All right, so let's talk about teeth. Mammals owe a lot of their success to the differentiated occluding, meaning touching, teeth. One of the greatest things about mammal teeth for paleontologists is that they're all extremely specific to each taxa. So a lot of the times we can tell different species just by a singular tooth. Now there's 4 main types of teeth, including you. You have the same 4 types of teeth. We have the incisors up in the front for scraping and biting. All right, we have our canines for tearing. Also for display. A lot of mammals have canines that are quite terrifying looking. There's a reason for that. Premolars, depending on the diet, it's either going to be flat for grinding, or you can have blade-shaped premolars for slicing if you're a carnivore. So here I should have mentioned this before. We can actually see the teeth being highlighted. So here we have our incisors up here in purple. We have the canines here in red. Premolars here in green. And finally, these here, the molars in blue. These are typically going to be mortar and pestle shaped for grinding. So every mammal has what we're going to call a dental formula, and that describes the configuration of the jaw. We list them in the order that they should go, so the incisors, the canines, the premolars, and molars. So the human dental formula is 2, 1, 2, 3, meaning you have 2 incisors, 2 canines, 2 premolars, and 3 molars, all right, in each quadrate. Dogs have a slightly different one. They have 3 incisors, 1 canine, 3 premolars, 2 molars. So there's a specific type of tooth that we're going to talk about here, and this is the major innervation in earlier mammals. This is called the trivosphenic molar. This is essentially going to give us like the trilobes here. That's where it gets its name from here. But it allows the teeth to fit together like a pestle and mortar, there we go, which makes chewing extremely efficient, which is really helpful for mammals because this gives us a really great ability to have a broad and varied diet. So there's a couple different types here, of course. These teeth are all very different from one another. These are early late Triassic mammals, okay, or early mammals in the late Triassic. All right, and we can see those really nice teeth that would fit together quite well. As I said earlier, mammals typically replace their teeth only once in the lifetime, so baby teeth to adult teeth. Most diapsids, the group including reptiles, can continuously replace teeth. Sharks can continuously replace teeth. I want you to look in your fossil box, and if you don't have your fossil box, remember that you had a horse tooth and a shark tooth inside it. So take a look at a horse tooth right now, either from your fossil box or if you have to look up an image, that's fine. Okay, so most mammals replace their teeth only once in our lifetime. That can have a huge drawback, right? Say if you break your teeth. However, our teeth are extremely efficient, so there is a drawback, higher efficiency, but if you lose your teeth, that could be deadly. So some exceptions, rodents and rabbits. The rabbits are not rodents. They're really closely related. Rodents belong to rodentia. Rabbits belong to something called the lagomorphs, but they continuously grow their front teeth, their incisors. So they continuously have to chew on things to grind their teeth down. Horses are actually the same. Horses have an open root system, which means they have a lot of enamel teeth and they continue growing throughout their life. So if they ever stop eating, that can actually be deadly. Many rabbits and mammals in their older age and horses will have overgrown teeth that can actually puncture through some of the soft tissue in their mouth. So that's a really big concern for pet owners and for organisms out in the wild. Elephants have 6 molars that erupt throughout their lifetime. These are the main deviations from this diphyodont situation where we replace the teeth only once. So here is a horrifying image of a human child, all right? And we can see all the baby and adult teeth showing up. So quick fun fact, the term eye teeth is referring to your canines. So you would say, I'd give my eye teeth for this. It's an old saying, right? It actually comes from the fact that your canines are really darn close to your eye sockets. When you were a child, your adult teeth are up there. Some humans can actually grow extra teeth. These are called ancillary teeth, and they can actually erupt through weird places, like through the nose throughout their lifetime. That's a deviation, though. That's not common. So mammals have extremely different types of teeth. We can have extremely elongated canines, like in the like a saber-toothed tiger. We can have extremely elongated incisors. We can have open root systems that allow for really, really, really large teeth coming through. We have these lobed teeth. These are the mammoth and elephant teeth. All right. And these allow for extreme grinding continuously of plant material. So you see that mammal teeth are really what brings a lot of the specialization to the forefront of evolution. So we have a lot of different types of teeth. You see how high these molars are? These are for excellent amounts of grinding throughout their life. All right, so let's talk about the 3 major types of mammals really quickly. There are only 5 species alive today of monotremes, and most of them are in all of them are in Australia today, and most of the evolutionary history does place them in that general area. They lay eggs. They're adorable, like the platypus and the spiny echidna. Here is a little baby echidna coming out of an egg. All of these animals are really strange compared to other mammals today. They have a lot of strange features associated with them. Their evolutionary history is not as well known as other groups of mammals. We have the metatherians. These include the marsupials. They're not all of the metatherians, but they're the major group alive today. There's 334 extant, meaning still living species. They're born early, extremely early, and then they develop in their mother's pouch. Earliest fossils place them about the Cretaceous, and they spread from Asia to North America, though most of our modern organisms now live in Australia. Not totally sure how they got there, but there you go. They usually have more teeth, so their dental formula is a little bit different than ours. The koala, of course, is an extremely famous example of this. The birth of marsupial organisms is absolutely fascinating. And the reason for this is if you take a koala bear, the infant is actually born about the size of a jelly bean, and it kind of looks like a jelly bean, to be honest, a little squirming jelly bean. And it makes this harrowing journey from the birth canal up to the pouch, where then it grows into the fully developed infant. So you can take a look. This is a baby kangaroo. As I said, a little tiny squirming jelly bean here. And it actually makes the journey up by itself by swinging on the parts of the body. So you should watch this video here because it is absolutely wild to think about. The kangaroo mom does almost nothing to help the baby. All right, so the placentals. These are the major group of mammals today. These are eutherians. It's the proper term for it. This is the group that you and I, dogs, cats, rodents, other primates, etc., belong to. They radiate massively following the disappearance of the non-avian dinosaurs, and their evolution is strongly tied to biogeography, which means that they're essentially following the pathways of plate tectonic breakup for the most part. There's also dispersal as well. Here we have the evolutionary tree of our eutherians. We are over here with the rodents and the rabbits. They share, rodents and rabbits are the sister group to primates. All right. Rodents being things like guinea pigs, capybara, rats, etc. Rabbits, of course. And then on this other side here, we have whales and bats, horses and rhinos, dogs, pangolins. Xenarthas on this side over here, like the armadillo. We have elephants, aardvarks, and things like that. Placentals. Arguably the laziest, but cutest of mammals, I think. So there's a lot of convergent evolution in mammals, and we'll talk a little bit about this. Just as a reminder, convergent evolution is the idea that organisms that are distantly related evolve similar looking forms because they have similar ecological roles or pressures. For example, a torpedo shape for streamlined swimming. We actually see this across different groups like the chondrichthyes, otherwise known as sharks, osteichthyes. These are fish, like this ichthyosaur here. This is a secondarily marine reptile. Dolphins, these are mammals. And then penguins, dinosaurs, birds. All right, all of them have evolved a similar shape, not because they're closely related, but because they have similar pressures. Swimming. Here's another great example. We have wings developing in mammals, in diapsids, and in insects. So we have bats, birds, and insects. All right, the only group left out of here that has active flying are the pterosaurs in this particular example. Now we know this is convergent evolution instead of homology because each of these wings are developing incredibly differently. They have very different structures associated with them, even if they look similar on the surface. There's a lot of striking examples of convergence between marsupials and placentals. So here are some examples of really similar looking things, though they're not closely related. So we have the moles here. These are fossorial, they're digging creatures here, and we can tell they're digging based on these lovely, lovely, lovely claws and the elongated nose. We have passive flyers like the sugar glider and the flying squirrel. The wombat and the woodchuck, these have very similar ecological roles. And then finally, last down here, the Tasmanian devil and the wolverine. These are carnivores. So here we have an example of Smilodon, elongated front teeth, extremely flexible jaw joint for eating and hunting. Here we have a very similar marsupial. This is an extinct organism that had very similar ecological roles. We also have the dingo and the marsupial wolf here. These look incredibly similar. However, they're not closely related. This is convergent evolution. Now we're going to talk really quickly about one of the major events in mammalian history, which is going to be called the Great American Biotic Interchange, okay? Which gives it a really fancy name. But the idea is South America and North America were not always touching. And in fact, for the most of history, they were not touching. The Isthmus of Panama closed a couple million years ago, quite literally a couple million years ago. And North, South, and Central America had a massive exchange of fauna because there was a lot more land. So this is some type of dispersal, right? So this was generally bad for South American species because they became the less successful group on both continents. And we'll talk about why that is. Older textbooks will talk about superior North American species and weaker South American species. But one, you can clearly see that there's quite a bit of bias in that statement right there. And this is an unfortunate example of humans interjecting their bias into science. But two, it's not that simple. There are reasons that South American species were less successful, and they can be explained by ecology. So let's talk about this. We see that some sloths, giant sloths, actually made it up to North America. We see a whole bunch of interchange, so mammoths and other things, or related things, horses, etc., made their way down too. We can check this in the fossil record. So first, South American species were already in decline before the Isthmus of Panama closed. What this means is that when North America and South America connected through the Isthmus of Panama, what we had was an invasive species event from North America to South America. And invasive species events almost always lead to extinction events in the areas of the native species. So this happened many times before in evolutionary history. For example, Ohio has really great records of invasive species events when we had transgressions and sea levels would rise, introducing new species to other areas. And second, and likely the most important part of this story, is that there's high asymmetry in climate distributions, meaning South American species were adapted for tropical conditions. And tropical conditions typically stable, right? Because if it's in the tropics, it's typically near the equator. It's really never going to get cold. So organisms that move north had a really hard time surviving. On the opposite side, because of the distribution of most North American species at the times, they were adapted for a broader range of climate. They were more generalists, which means they had a better tolerance of climatic variation. So, as with most extinctions, a lot of the relative success of North American species was pretty much all about luck. Nothing else. But I really wanted to talk to you about one of my favorite examples of one of our friendly species in the Great American Biotic Interchange here. This is the giant ground sloth. We've talked a little bit about this fossil, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit more. So Charles Darwin actually discovered this particular species here. Darwin lived for quite some time in the Andes of Argentina. Here is an actual image of the shelter that he lived in during this time. This was during his voyage on the Beagle when they were essentially staying in Argentina for a little bit. Okay? So the ground sloth has a fascinating tail. Sloths today are much, much, much smaller, but we do think that ground sloths and humans knew each other. There's fossil evidence to suggest this. So I'm going to tell you a fun tale of ground sloth, avocado, and poo. All right, so the ground sloth really likes avocado. Who doesn't? But avocado seeds have a specific issue here. They really have to be spread far away from their parent plants to gain enough sunlight and resources to survive. But knowing what you know about the distribution of sediments and how we move sediments, the avocado seeds are quite large, which means they really can't be moved by wind, and you'd need a really strong water current to be able to move these. Sloths, however, these giant sloths could swallow them whole and transport them. Well, then they would poop them out. And this is how avocados became distributed across a much broader range of the Americas. Without this giant ground sloth, we may not know avocado toast. Think about that horrifying thought. So not everybody understands the avocado's incredible legacy and the gift that our ground sloths have given us, but there you go. Hopefully you know I'm making fun of this article on the right here. Okay. All right, I will see you all for the next lecture. We're going to pick up with human and primate evolution specifically.